My family stole my $12,000 college fund and gave it to my sister. Now she abandoned her baby, and my parents demand I drop out to raise him. But I said no, and they called me the most selfish daughter ever. I'm 21 years old, studying industrial engineering at a university 3 hours from home, and I still can't believe my parents thought I was going to give up everything for a problem they created themselves. The thing is, this started like 2 years ago, when I got my acceptance letter to my dream university with a partial scholarship, and I thought things were finally working out for me. You know, after years of working like crazy to maintain perfect grades while my older sister, Tiffany, literally did whatever she wanted without consequences. But anyway, I guess I should start there, with what it was like living with Tiffany before all of this blew up in my face. Tiffany is 3 years older than me, and for as long as I can remember, she's been the problem child of the family, like the classic older sister who does everything wrong, but the parents keep defending her because, I don't know, firstborn or something? When I was like 12 years old, she had already been expelled from 2 different schools for fighting with other girls. They found her smoking weed in the bathroom on one occasion, and she basically spent more time grounded than free. But my parents always found a way to justify it. My mother would say things like, "She's going through a difficult phase, she needs our support," and my father would just pay whatever was necessary to get her out of trouble, whether it was fines, lawyers, or moving her to another private school that cost like twice as much as the previous one. Meanwhile, I was the invisible daughter, the one who got straight A's, the one who never gave them a headache, and I basically became an expert at going unnoticed because all the attention was always on Tiffany and her next disaster. The worst part is that Tiffany wasn't just a problem for my parents, she was horrible to me for years too. She constantly bullied me when we were alone at home, hid my things, insulted me, and once she even pushed me down the stairs because supposedly I had used her special shampoo that cost like $40 a bottle. I broke my arm in that fall, and when my parents asked what happened, Tiffany said I had tripped on my own, and they believed her. I mean, they didn't even question her version. I was 14 years old and my sister was 17. Was it really that hard to see who the victim was there? But anyway, I learned quickly that complaining didn't do any good, so I just focused on school, worked part-time from age 16 at a coffee shop near home, and saved every penny I could because I knew college was my ticket out of that house. So we get to when I was 19 years old and had just graduated high school with honors. I had applied to like 6 different universities, and my first choice was this university that's 3 hours away. It's not the most prestigious in the country, but it has an incredible industrial engineering program, and the scholarship they offered me covered like 60% of tuition. I had saved for 3 years working at the coffee shop, plus some extra jobs on weekends, and I had like $12,000 saved in a savings account that my dad had helped me open when I was 16, specifically for college. The idea was that those savings would cover what the scholarship didn't cover, plus housing and books expenses, and if I was careful with money, I could graduate without huge debts. I was super excited, feeling like all the effort had been worth it. Until one night, like 2 weeks after receiving my acceptance letter, my parents asked me to sit down and talk in the living room. The conversation started weird from the beginning. My mother had that face she makes when she's going to say something she knows I won't like, and my father wouldn't stop looking at his phone like he wanted to be anywhere else but there. I thought they were going to tell me they couldn't help me financially with anything beyond what I had already saved, which was fine. I never expected them to pay for my entire college, but what they said was 1,000 times worse. Turns out Tiffany, who by then was 22 years old and had been dating this guy named Steven for like 2 years who didn't have a stable job and basically lived off selling who knows what, was pregnant. Okay, first bomb. Second bomb. My parents had decided to buy her a 2-bedroom apartment in a complex that was like 20 minutes from their house because, according to them, Tiffany needed a stable place to raise the baby. Third bomb, and the one that literally left me speechless. To buy that apartment, they needed money for the down payment, and they had decided to take my college savings. I'm not exaggerating when I say I sat there unable to process what they had just said for like a full minute. My father was the one who explained the twisted logic behind all this. He said something like, "Look, Caroline, we understand you worked very hard for that money, but technically the account is in my name too. And Tiffany is in an emergency situation. She's going to be a mother and needs stability. You have a scholarship and you're smart. You'll find a way to make it work. You always do." And my mother added that they hoped I would understand this was for the good of the family, that a baby needed a safe roof, and that I could get student loans or work more hours, but that Tiffany didn't have those options. Can you believe it? They were basically telling me to sacrifice my future because my sister, who had never worked a full day in her life and had just gotten pregnant by a guy she met at a party, needed a free apartment. I exploded, obviously. I yelled at them that this was completely unfair, that money was mine, that I had worked for years to save it while Tiffany wasted every opportunity they gave her, that they couldn't just steal it from me like that. My father cut me off and said, "We're not stealing it from you, Caroline. Technically, it's my account too, and I'm making a financial decision for the good of the whole family. If you don't like it, you can look for other options for college." That phrase, "you can look for other options," hurt more than everything else because he was basically saying my education was optional but Tiffany's apartment was a priority. My mother tried to soften things by saying that once Tiffany and Steven stabilized, they would pay me back. But we both knew that was never going to happen because neither Tiffany nor Steven had any real income or plans to get it. I went to my room furious and spent all night awake trying to calculate how I was going to be able to pay for college without those savings. I cried until I had no tears left. Not just because of the money, but because of the brutal confirmation that for my parents I was always going to be the second choice, the daughter who could manage on her own while Tiffany received everything on a silver platter. The next day, I called the university's financial aid office and met with a counselor who helped me apply for student loans. I got 2 part-time jobs on campus for when classes started, one at the library and another at the university cafeteria, and I basically accepted that I was going to graduate with debt, but at least I was going to graduate. My parents took the $12,000 from my account, bought Tiffany the apartment, and they didn't even thank me or apologize. They just acted like I should be happy to sacrifice myself for my sister. Things got even worse before I left for college. Tiffany gave birth to a boy they named Jackson when I was about to start my first semester, and my parents basically converted my bedroom into a second nursery for when Tiffany visited them with the baby. They didn't ask me. They didn't warn me. They just packed most of my things in boxes and put them in the garage, put a crib where my desk used to be. And when I went home to pick up the last things before moving to campus, my mother casually mentioned, "Oh yeah, we needed the space for Jackson. We hope you don't mind." They hoped I didn't mind? It was literally the last straw. They had taken my savings and now my bedroom, and I was expected to smile and accept it because everything was for Tiffany and her baby. I moved to campus in August, and honestly, it was a huge relief to be away from all that toxicity. The first months were brutal. I studied like crazy because I couldn't afford to lose my scholarship. I worked 25 hours a week between my 2 jobs, and I basically lived on a super tight budget, where every dollar counted. But I was free. You know what I mean? I didn't have to see Tiffany parading around the house like she was the queen while my parents spoiled her. I didn't have to hear the constant excuses for why she couldn't do the things adults are supposed to do, like work or be responsible. I talked to my parents maybe once a month, super superficial conversations where they asked me how classes were going and I answered fine and that was it. Neither of us mentioned the apartment or the stolen savings. It was like they had decided that topic simply didn't exist. What I didn't know was that things with Tiffany were going to hell in ways I couldn't even imagine. I basically didn't have much contact with my family for the next 2 years. I only went home at Christmas and sometimes Thanksgiving. And when I went, my parents acted like everything was perfect. They asked me about school, they bragged to the neighbors that they had a daughter in college, but we never talked about Tiffany or Jackson beyond superficial comments like, "Oh yeah, Jackson is 2 years old now. He's growing so fast." I didn't ask much either because honestly, I didn't care. I had made peace with the fact that my nuclear family was a disaster and that my life was at university. With my friends and my future that I was building with my own hands. Everything exploded again like 3 months ago. It was a normal Tuesday. I had an important thermodynamics exam the next day that was worth 40% of my final grade. I was at the library studying since 8 inches the morning, and like at 3 p.m. my phone started ringing like crazy. My mother called 5 times in a row, then my father another 3, and I kept rejecting the calls because I was literally in the middle of reviewing complex formulas and couldn't get distracted. I finally answered like at 6 p.m. when I went out to grab a quick dinner, and my mother was hysterical on the other side of the phone, screaming, "Where have you been? Why aren't you answering? We need you to come home now, it's an emergency." My first thought was that someone had died, like a grandparent or something. So I asked her what was going on, and she just kept saying, "I can't explain it to you over the phone. You need to come immediately. Your father is already driving there to pick you up. I told her I couldn't just leave like that because I had a crucial exam the next day, and she literally screamed, "Your sister needs your help. This exam can wait." She passed the phone to my father, who was a bit more direct but equally urgent. He said, "Caroline, Tiffany left Jackson here and disappeared. We need you to come help us with this. We don't know what to do." And I was like, "Excuse me? What? Tiffany left the kid? What do you mean? She disappeared?" My father quickly explained that that morning someone had rung their doorbell like at 6 a.m. When he opened the door, there was no one there, but there was a kid's backpack on the porch with Jackson inside, asleep, and a note attached that said something about Tiffany not being able to anymore and needing time. My parents had been trying to contact Tiffany all day, but her phone was off. They had gone to her apartment and it was empty, like they had moved out overnight, and now they were alone with a 2-year-old child not knowing what to do. And I, from my perspective being completely honest, thought, okay, that's a horrible problem, but what am I supposed to do about it? Why are they calling me like it's my responsibility to fix Tiffany's mess again? I told my father I was very sorry about Jackson, but I couldn't miss my exam. That I had worked all semester to get to that moment and that missing that exam meant failing the class, which would put my scholarship at risk. My father got angry, said something like, "We always knew you were selfish, Caroline, but this is a new level. Your nephew needs you and you're worried about a stupid exam." And I calmed down enough to tell him, "Dad, you have to call CPS or the police. This is child abandonment. It's not something you can resolve on your own or something I can help with from here." He went crazy, yelled at me, "How dare I suggest involving social services? That would destroy the family. The neighbors would find out. They needed to handle it internally." I hung up on him because I was starting to shake from anxiety and needed to focus on my exam. The next 2 days were a nightmare of ignored calls and text messages. I turned off my phone during the exam. Did my best, considering my mind was in 1,000 different places, and when I turned it back on, I had like 30 missed calls and increasingly desperate voicemails from my parents. That night, after the exam, I finally listened to all the messages. The story that emerged was basically that Tiffany had been using heavier drugs with Steven for months. The apartment was full of trash and unsanitary conditions. Neighbors had reported that they left Jackson alone for hours, and apparently Tiffany had decided she couldn't handle motherhood and just left. The note she left said something about needing to find herself, and that she knew Jackson would be better off with family. Specifically mentioned that she hoped I would take care of him, because I had always been the responsible one. That hit me like a train. Tiffany, who had made my life impossible for years, who had indirectly taken my savings because my parents prioritized her apartment over my education, was now trying to pass her son off to me as if it were my responsibility to clean up her mess. And the worst part is, my parents seemed to think that was reasonable. When I finally called them back, my mother was crying, saying things like, "We know this isn't fair to you, Caroline, but you're the only option. We're too old to raise a small child again. Your father is 58 years old and I'm 56. We don't have the energy. And you're young and capable, and Jackson already knows you from Christmas visits." I told them to please give me a second to process all this, that I would go home over the weekend to talk in person, but I couldn't promise them anything. Friday, after my classes, I drove the 3 hours to their house, mentally prepared myself for what I was going to find, and when I arrived, the scene was basically chaotic. Jackson was watching cartoons in the living room. My mother looked exhausted with huge dark circles, and my father was on the phone trying to contact Steven's relatives in case they knew anything about Tiffany's whereabouts. I sat down with them and asked to read the full note Tiffany had left, and it was worse than I imagined. It basically said she couldn't be a mother, that she and Steven had serious problems, that they needed time to resolve their issues, and that she trusted that Caroline, her responsible and successful sister, could give Jackson the life he deserved, something she apparently couldn't do. It was so manipulative, so calculated, like Tiffany knew exactly what she was doing by specifically mentioning me in that note. She was trying to force me to take over using guilt. And when I asked my parents about the drugs and the apartment conditions, they finally admitted things they had clearly been hiding from me. Turns out they had received calls from social services months ago about neglect reports. They had had to go clean the apartment on multiple occasions because it was unsanitary. They had constantly given Tiffany money for food and diapers because she and Steven spent it, all on drugs. And they had basically been covering up the fact that my sister was a completely unfit mother and drug addict. Then they dropped the real bomb on me. They told me they had talked to a lawyer that week and that they could apply for temporary custody of Jackson, but that due to their ages and health, my father has heart problems and my mother has type 2 diabetes, the plan was for me to take a break from university, move back home, and basically become Jackson's mom while they helped me financially. They wanted me to sacrifice my last year and a half of college, my degree, my future, everything, to clean up Tiffany's mess. My mother presented it as something temporary, said something like, just until Tiffany recovers and can take care of him again, probably just a few months. And I knew that was a lie because Tiffany was never going to recover or come back, and these few months would turn into years, into my whole life. I flat out refused. I told them I understood it was a horrible situation, but I wasn't going to leave college, that I had worked too hard to get to where I was, that it wasn't fair to ask me to throw my future in the trash because Tiffany couldn't be a functional adult. My father got angry again, said I was being incredibly selfish, that Jackson was family, that sometimes in life you have to make sacrifices. And I responded, sacrifices? You took my savings to buy Tiffany an apartment. You converted my bedroom into a nursery without asking me. You never defended me when she bullied me. And now you want me to sacrifice my career to raise her son because she decided to abandon him? Where were you asking Tiffany to make sacrifices or be responsible? The fight was brutal. My mother cried and said, I didn't understand how hard it was to be a parent, that they had done the best they could with both of us, that Tiffany had problems I didn't understand. And I basically exploded and told them all the things I had kept inside for years. I told them they had always favored her, that they had created this monster by never setting boundaries, that every time Tiffany screwed up, they rescued her, and now they were surprised she didn't know how to be an adult, and that I wasn't going to be part of that cycle of enabling her destructive behavior. I told them they had to call CPS, officially report the abandonment, and let professionals take care of Jackson, and that if they wanted to apply for temporary custody, that was their decision. But I wasn't going to be involved beyond occasionally visiting them as an aunt. My father told me to leave his house if I was going to be that cruel and heartless, and I grabbed my things and left. I drove back to college crying the whole way, feeling guilty but also knowing I had done the right thing, because if I gave in on this, if I let them manipulate me into abandoning my life again, I was never going to get out of that pattern. The next few days were horrible because the guilt is real. You know? I thought about Jackson, who wasn't to blame for any of this, who had basically been abandoned by his mother, and now his grandparents couldn't care for him properly. But I also knew I wasn't the solution to that. Becoming his mother at 21 years old, when I'm a year and a half from graduating, would destroy my life. My parents finally called CPS and reported the situation. There was an investigation. Tiffany and Stephen were located like 2 weeks later in a city 4 hours away, living in a cheap motel. They confirmed both had serious addiction problems, and CPS gave my parents temporary custody of Jackson while they worked on a long-term plan. My parents applied for permanent custody, and the court granted it to them like a month ago, with supervision from social workers who visit regularly to make sure Jackson is in a safe environment. Tiffany apparently entered a 90-day rehab program. I have no idea if she's going to complete it or if afterward she'll try to regain custody. But honestly, it's not my problem. I've talked to my parents only twice since then, brief and cold conversations where they update me on Jackson and I ask how they're managing everything. They're still resenting me for not having left college to help them, and I'm still resenting them for decades of favoritism toward Tiffany and for expecting me to clean up their mistakes. I haven't seen Jackson since that weekend 3 months ago, and I feel guilty about that. But I also know I can't allow myself to get more involved because my parents are going to try to use him as leverage to manipulate me. I'm focused on finishing my second to last semester. My grades are good despite all the drama. And in a year and a half, I'm going to graduate with my industrial engineering degree and start my life far away from all this toxicity. The truth is, I don't know if I did the right thing. There are days where I wonder if I should have done more for Jackson, if I'm really as selfish as my father says. But then I remember, I didn't create this situation, that my parents enabled Tiffany to become who she is, and that asking me to sacrifice my future to fix the consequences of their decisions isn't fair or reasonable. I guess in the end, everyone has to live with their choices. And I chose my education and my future over being the savior of a family that never valued me until they needed something from me.